Surah 67. It is impossible to give a satisfactory account of the composition of this surah. Verse 1 through 4 form a connected passage, and in subject, verse 5 might join to it. But there is an abrupt change from a description of a law in the third person to an address by a law in the first person plural. Even if we suppose both passages to be spoken by angels, the break is not smoothed over. Moreover, verse 5 through 12 do not read very smoothly. It is curious to find two different words used for the place to which the Satans and the unbelievers are consigned, and in fact, the last clause of verse 5 hardly seems in place as referring to the Satans. Either it has been added as a rhyme phrase to an older verse, or the passage has been detached from some other context. The pronoun referring back to the unbelievers spoken of there, verse 10, does not correspond to what has been said in verse 9, and would in fact join better to verse 5. The connection would be improved if we were to suppose that verse 27 interposed between them. This would give us a passage originally consisted of verse 5, 27, 10, 11, of which 27. How is it rejected if it's included, and included right where it's said? What's this? They're trying to figure out some editing theory that leaves everything in. Yet says it's interjected and replaced, and anyways. Verse 6 through 9, 12 being at the same time. Verse 13, we return to the description of a law addressed to the people, as in 1 through 4, and this continues in verses 14 through 17 and in 20, 21. Verse 18 and 19 are of the connection. Verse 22 seems to have some relation to them. We thus get a fairly continuous address, verse 1 through 4, 13 through 17, 20, 21, possibly with the back of the intervening verses 5 through 12 and 18, 19, 22, 23. Though this is uncertain, the rest of the surah from 23 onward consists of the separate little declarations which have little connection with each other, or the rest of the surah. Verse 29 looks like a note for the continuation of the dress, broken off at 21. As to dates, little can be said, perhaps, that the address is all in probability Medinan. Surat al-Mulk, chapter of the kingship, the glory of Allah, Medinan, verse 1 through 4, punishment of the unbelievers, Meccan, revised Medina, 5 through 11, reward of the pious, 12 to 14, the mention of the shooting stars, the projectiles for the Satans. Very interesting, a lot of the impact sites actually have traditions of polytheistic cults and spirit communication and stuff in the places. Allah's knowledge, Medinan, 13, 14. Allah's power, Medinan, 15 to 17. Signs, 18, 19. Allah's power, 20 to 22. Unconnected declarations, maybe at various dates, 23 to 30. Verse 27 does not connect with 25, 26. It's rather part of a judgment scene. Or does it? The knowledge of it is with God. I'm warning about, the judgment and the effects of stuff and the promise coming. It most definitely does connect with that. The wings, as in the ranks of the army, but actually the birds, but it kind of makes you think of the wings of an army, doesn't it? Now that they mention it. Walking bent on your face, like someone who stumbles and falls and having health problems. Like when you start to have breathing problems, you kind of start slashing forward. Verse 19, and the idea that animals are more responsive than man. Isaiah 1:3 confirms that. We have the hearts as an understanding. We've talked about the resurrection, haven't we? And we've mentioned the shooting stars as projectiles. So Surah 68, the nucleus of the surah is the late Meccan passage, verse 1 through 6, verse 7, with which probably go 8 and 9 is later, though possibly still Meccan. Verse 10 through 16 are an addition, probably referring to some prominent Jewish opponent in Medina, the story of the garden, verse 17 to 33. 33, perhaps a later comment connects rather with 8 and 9 rather than with 10 through 16. The implication of the story that the unbelievers had fallen under trial would suit their defeat at Badr, but even better, the affliction of Mecca by famine, which tradition asserts to have taken place sometime before the Hijrah. Verse 34 to 43 are Medinan, but is not clear against whom they are directed, probably polytheists. Verse 44 to 45 are earlier, but 44b is later for 45. Their presence here may be due to the insertion of 46, 47, which are apparently intended with 34 to 43, verse 48 to 50. We'll then go with the latter passage. 51 and 52 seem rather unconnected and maybe earlier, but if you look at the noon thing and them treating like he's crazy and that sort of thing, and it's a reference, it's known as a healing for insanity, it totally fits, right? Muhammad not mad, Meccan, verse 7, possibly 8 and 9 are later than 1 through 6, but 1 through 9 here. Depend on what they write, usually taken as a reference to the heavenly Qur'an, but more probably used to previous revelations. Well, it's broader than that. It's everything you write down. Surah 41, ayat 7, the reward that's rightfully ours. And the task generally taken, thou art of a lofty nature. But the word khuluq also means custom, habit, and the reference is probably the Prophet's habit of reciting the Quran to the objective, which is more appropriate. Okay, so the ones, you form the good deeds, and the good deeds become something mighty. But initially, it's something maybe difficult that you just push through, and then you build your strength in it. Spiritual exercises, as they're called. An opponent scored Medinan 10 through 16, parable of a blighted garden, same time as 7 through 9, 17 through 30 to 43. And highly esteemed as an adopted from an ignoble family, which is said to refer to Walid bin Mughira, but the word probably from Zanama, to mark a well-bred camel by cutting part of the ear and letting it hang down. And it didn't, and the person didn't add if Allah will. So when you're doing something, you add if God will. Or leaving nothing for the poor, but there are no exception to their gardens, right? And the middle one in age, what's the middle one of age? The most moderate, okay. But no, it could be, the most moderate. Not the one doing too much, not the one doing too little, but somewhere in between, right? The reward of the pious is the fate of the unbelievers, Medinan 34 to 43. The unbelievers will be punished, maybe earlier, 44 and 45. 46 to 50, maybe with 34 to 43. The Muslimin are the ones that have resigned. And the oaths are the guarantees. A frequent simile in poetry for the outbreak of war. Poetry or the leg being bared, but it refers to the death struggle. No, people generally think it refers to the when we'll see God, because the material nature won't obscure that. So the step by step, the gradual, gradual revelation, gradual whatever. The fish, when called, Jonah, well, the person of the fish, really. The desert, cast on the desert, Surah 37, 145. And weaned against giving way, 51, 52. Surah 69, connects in a way accusations against Muhammad, and it's worse than saying insane. That's like, well, he knows better, but he's making it up. And so that some of this is going to be addressed in this chapter. This surah begins with a word which required explanation and which may have been singled out by a question from some previous deliverance denouncing something as due upon the unbelievers. The original answer seems to have been contained in verse 4 to 6 and perhaps 8. The means of destruction of the mood here given does not correspond with what is stated in other passages, for it can hardly be anything so indefinite as a punishment surpassing in its severity, but it must have referred to something definite like a flood. The presumption that this passage is early, verse 7, which falls out of the construction, has been added, and probably at the same time additional examples of people on whom catastrophe fell were cited, verse 9 and 10. Verse 11 and 12 are still later, and they probably refer to Noah. The phrase, and those before him, may have been inserted in verse 9 to prepare for them. From verse 13 onwards, the reference is no longer to temporal catastrophes befalling peoples, but the resurrection and judgment. The passage does not all belong to the same time. Verse 13 through 17 is a theophany, no doubt, intended as another answer to the question as to what al-haqqa is, reality and all that. Verse 18 to 32, which in spite of inequality of the rhyme toward the end seem to be a unity, depicting the contrasted fates of the evil and the good. Verse 33 to 37, which have a quite different rhyme, have no doubt been added to the later proceeding to emphasize the wickedness and the punishment of the evildoer. At the same time, perhaps belongs the passage 38 to 52, which has no close connection in a sense and may be intended to emphasize the preceding deliverance. It almost certainly contains a later assertion of the truth of the message, 38 to 40, 41a, 42a, perhaps 43. Verse 53 is the formal close of the surah. The bulk of the surah is no doubt Meccan, though some of the later additions may be Medinan. Surat al-Haqqa, chapter of that which is due, former people destroyed for unbelief, fairly early Meccan with later additions, 1 through 12, the last judgment, possibly later alternative, possibly with 4, 13 through 32, still later 33 to 37, early assertion of the truth of the message, 38 through 52. Oh, same number of, it relates, okay. Death and what comes after it, so the certainty. The grief, the sighing. Muhammad being a most honorable speaker, and the food of the rinsings, the explained as the rinsing of the bodies of the damned, and being finished off, the people who don't have a good afterlife are definitely going to want death to have been it, but that's not how it works. The book, your book, is going to be the, your own deeds. So you got the book of yourself, you got the revealed books, you got the book of nature, and you're supposed to learn from them all. And of course, your book, you got to watch out for those deeds that are going to be included in your book. And the cities of the plain, the people of Lot, the overwhelmed cities, the people of Noah before Pharaoh, destructively, continuously, long-term storms. There can be days in a row of thunderings and lightnings and all sorts of stuff, and high winds, and sometimes for a few days here, it's like the wind blows constantly, and it's not deniable. But at least the hurricane, at least we rarely get anything that would be considered a hurricane. Well, not really. Some years. That was knocking at the door imminent. So the striking and outburst and all that. Something that passes its limits. Not the same thing as the word tagut. That's something else. Surah 70. The beginning answers a question regarding the coming of the punishment suggested by 52, 7 and 8. The original answer was 6 and 7. Verse 4 and 5 are inserted, designed to obviate the difficulty of the delay in coming of the event. And verse 3 probably goes with them. It agrees in rhyme to 1 and 2, but the rhyme in this surah is varied. Verse 8 through 14 probably belong to the same time as 3 to 5. Verse 15 to 18 are probably an early continuation of 6 and 7, describing the nature of the punishment. Verse 19 to 21 seem to be connected with them, though the rhyme is again different. To this has been added the long passage, accepting the believers from the general condemnation of man. The beginning of this may still be Meccan, but it originally ended at 28 or 27. The rest is Medinan, and 30 and 31, or perhaps a later. And the passage is similar to 23, 1 through 11, which may be perhaps later than this. A conclusion, 36 to 44, is somewhat difficult to place on the assumption that it is Meccan is usually taken to refer to the unbelievers crowding round to make fun of the prophet. But the natural interpretation is that they are now anxious to secure his friendship. In that case, the passage must be fairly late Meccan. Surat al-Ma'arij, the chapter of the stairs, the ascent, the coming punishment, 1 through 14. So like Surah 52, 7 and 8, there's no averter of the punishment of the unbelief. Master of the stairs, an obscure reference perhaps, like Jacob's ladder in Genesis 28, verse 12, or in the Qur'an 32, verse 4. Hellfire, 15 through 18. Man's avarice, 19 through 21, same time as 15 through 18. Later describing the pious, Meccan, with Medinan, 22 to 44. Altar stones, some stuff left in groups. That's the clans. Those left in groups, or the clans or tribes or whatever. Hurrying to a standard, perhaps altar stones. 2 Peter 3:10. Some take the word to mean dregs of oil, of the molten metal day of judgment times, right? Mountains like wool, they'll crumbled into a soft heap, and people looking at each other, the sinner wishing that even their own family they could hand over to, want this to stop. The companion and his brother, so the wife and the brother too. Remember that Berlin papyrus thing? Some messed up stuff. The rebel in the soul. The rebel in the soul goes over. There's no averter for the unbeliever. Oh, okay, we already went through that. And we have Surah 71. The surah is devoted to the story of Noah, but as the change of rhyme in verse 5 shows, it's not a unity in composition. Not necessarily. Are they just looking at the end rhyme, or what? Anyways, the introduction as it stands is Medinan, but may contain earlier elements. For the story could hardly have begun with 5. The other hand, it might be questioned whether 5 through 19 originally belonged to the story of Noah. It's more a reflex of Muhammad's own experience and the rendering of the biblical account. See, Muhammad's not trying to copy the Bible or any of what's in other people's hands. So, in any case, it is a Meccan passage, probably expanded when adapted to its position here. The conclusion of the surah is in some confusion to somebody who's going to say, it's like, well, it has to be written like the Bible. No, it has to be like itself. Verse 27 is with the destruction, is after the destruction of the unbelievers, as we mentioned in 25. And we have a reputation of Noah's appeal to Allah, while there's different calamities that come, and after something's over, you maybe need to remind it again after a little interjection or something. Verse 27 and 20 to 29 are probably earlier than 20 to 26, but or a phrase with 29 may be Meccan. Verse 20 to 26 may have been substituted for them, but have probably been expanded by the reference to the things falsely treated as gods. Surah Nuh, chapter of Noah, introduction, Medinan 1 through 4, his preaching, Meccan 5 through 19. And so refer to the Muslim World, volume 24, page 335. 339. Descending from the heaven, the rain, but if this is a promise, not a threat, it's appropriate to the story of Noah. Well, the story of Noah remains the same. Too much of the rain for you to bear. Or something from the heaven that comes upon you. Well, a meteor coming in about 9,200 years ago, creating a couple tidal waves. That would be, well, tidal wave to make the Red Sea bigger and make the Black Sea, but yeah. But he's created you by stages, as in referring to the growth of the embryo. People aren't expecting God in a serious way. You know, suggesting, Horowitz suggests that the word is late Hebrew and means glory, a reference to the appearance of Allah at the last day, which may be correct, but the ordinary meaning of the Arabic word, gravity, seriousness of purpose, suits quite well. And so appeal to Allah, early Medinan, 20 to 26 is appeal to Allah, Meccan 27 to 29, but isn't it 28? Where did he divide the verse off? Because I thought this was a 29. Oh, is it 24 that he divides into two parts? Because we have A and B there. So Surah 72, a number of short declarations introduced by say form the nucleus of the surah, verse 1 to 20, 21, 22, 23, 26, 25. These are Meccan and may be fairly well dated by tradition to about the time of the Prophet's visit to Ka'if, even though we do not accept the story of the band of jinn listening to him reciting the Qur'an on his way back. See, so why not? Well, why can you accept, but anyways, it's, so see, they're avoiding the references that are the backing that's more supportive and trying to come up with an alternative version of the account that would reject it. So see, that's the thing. But even if some spirit said something, does that prove it to everybody? No. And a lot of Christians actually make the opposite point. No, we believe this story, and that's why we reject Islam, is because we say that the spirits, some of them were convinced, but all those spirits are demons. None of them have ever done the right thing, which kind of exceeds whatever. But the speech of the jinn, that's plural for fire being, in verse 2 is afterwards at later times. Verse 3 to 13 may still be Meccan, though it is a little doubtful of some of the verses. 14, 15, certainly Medina. The speech of the jinn is certainly understood to end here, and in fact 16 through 19 can hardly be spoken by them. These verses are probably a still later addition. Changes have also been made on some of the declarations now standing at the end of the surah. Verse 24 was with 21 being written with on the back of, yeah, they're acting like there's these scraps with things on the back and other things that have things on the back, and no, whatever, people were taking up the space of whatever, and whether something was on the front or the back, or how do you define which one was the front or the back, which does allow for more games that people can play. It's like, well, what if you flip this page over here? Why? Rather than the order that everybody says it is and history records it to be, they're like, well, let's flip these parts here and there. Yeah. So Muhammad's claim as a prophet to have received revelations with regard to the unseen. Okay, Surat al-Jinn, chapter of the Jinn. Jinn listen to the Quran and repeat its teachings, Meccan with various dates, but then there's no evidence of various dates. 1 through 19, various declarations of Muhammad's position, 20 to 28. And so one lying in ambush, what's the one? So angels keeping watch over him. Well, you can say that this was what was said, but saying that he didn't come forth saying this. But yeah, obviously a non-Muslim is not going to believe that Muhammad had God's angels surrounding him and protecting his deliverance of the message until that was taken care of. God doesn't have a wife, is something repeated here. A female companion of any sort. No Ashtaroth, no Ishtar, no whatever you want to call it. The Shekinah is not some female deity along with God or something. The Holy Ghost isn't that either. Some people were afraid that God would destroy them for some of these beings said, well, God can destroy us for speaking falsely, but destroyed in the end. It doesn't mean the respite is removed. And that verse doesn't say that. The people in swarms. No, the spiritual presence that's attracted by the calling on God, the reciting of scripture, that sort of stuff. The jinn, angels, same thing. People swarming about in that presence. Sometimes you feel this pressing in when you're in your rituals and stuff, which sounds horrible, like you're being crushed to death, but you're not. It's great. These can hardly be spoken as the jinn. It looks like if it's made the construction forgotten. No, well, it's God talking about rewarding people. So after the mention of God talking about punishing people and God carrying out his purpose regardless of us, right? And if we take God's side, if we don't take God's side, it's going to be about the same. Surah 73, the surah begins with a passage to which 3 and 4a, there is no a, b, or any of that, have been evidently refers to the composition of the Qur'an and must date from near the beginning of its actual production of it. It was later interpreted referring to the night prayer when 3 and 4a were learned. Verse 9 and 10 may have been at this time, 11 to 14 at the same time, or probably later, verses 15 to 19, not connected in the way that they could say, but being addressed to the people, not to the prophet, and perhaps come from some other place. They seem to be earlier than 11 through 14. Verse 20 is long and evidently Medinan. It is a modification of the rigor of the practice of the night prayer and must have been composed with reference to the beginning of the surah, interpreted as referring to this practice, and may have been written on the back of 10 through 19, which would explain the presence of the unconnected passage 15 through 19. Surat al-Muzammil, the chapter of the heavily burdened. The Quran to be carefully composed, early afterwards to refer to the night prayer, 1 to 10. Bell's origin, page 97, talks about, okay, what was the note that we passed over? Because this is before the verse. Oh, the composition of the Quran, okay. Usually wrapped in garments, as in the burdened one. But above translation is more in accord with the root meaning of the word to load, more to one side than the other. Well, maybe your backside is the, not, I mean, the back half of your body is where the coats are hanging over and they support the weight when you're, like that. Oh, you don't see me gesturing to like, you're wrapped up to be warm or something. The pains in composing, it's like, and the time when the impressions and the proper words are most readily found. So the beginning of the night. Yeah, so you do get your sleep in the middle of the night. You maybe do something extra in the beginning of the night and then go to sleep and wake up and do something more extra, but unbelievers to be left for Allah to punish, 11 through 14. The mountains as a soft heap. Where's the verse? From a different root, it could mean poured out. 15 to 19, admonishment to believe, perhaps earlier than 11 through 14. The relaxation of the night prayer. You'll not count the time spent in prayer, so fulfill merely the letter of the law. So as to fulfill merely the letter of the law. Okay. Well, no, you fulfill the letter and the spirit of the law, but but it's talking about things that are done, you know, certain portions of the night that are used in prayer. How will you show piety if you disbelieve in a day? Okay. And then we go to Surah 74. You know, I'm not reading them here. I already did that. And well, I guess that will be posted when that's posted. The surah contains a number of earlier passages varying rhyme, loosely fitted together. Verse 1 through 7 are sometimes said to be the earliest in the Quran, but that can hardly be so. They show the prophet rousing himself from a mood of discouragement and passing from the promises and appeals to threats and warnings of the judgment to come. The next 3 verses speak of the judgment day, verse 11 through 26, apparently deal with some leading opponent said to be Walid bin Mughira. The rhyme changes at verse 18, and though in these early passages stress should not be laid on this, verse 11 through 17 give an impression of having been meant to refer to the unbelievers in general and have been particularized by the addition of 18 to 26. This depends to some extent on the construction and meaning of wahidan in verse 11. Sakar, apparently a proper name for hell, used in 26. Yeah, there's multiple proper names or proper names for the levels of hell, right? Required explanation given in 27 to 30. The number of its overseers given in 30 again to rise to discussion. This led to the addition of the explanation contained in the palpably Medinan verses 31 to 34. These beings are angels, you know, unfallen angels, genderless, light beings, etc. However you're going to describe them to distinguish them from the jinn, who are the fallen, but they fell at one point anyways. And that their number is merely stated as an opportunity for the doubters to show themselves. 2 forms of this latter statement seem to be involved, but it is not certain which is the earlier. Verse 35 to 40 may join the 27 to 30, but may be better to take the it of 38 as in similar passages to refer to some word denoting the message, and the piece is emphasizing its importance. Verse 40 looks like a later addition. Verse 41 to 49 fall into the late rhymes, and such conversations between the inmates of heaven and hell are probably late. The use of the word sakar is no doubt to its occurrence in early portions of the surah. The concluding passage describing the hearers running away from the message is earlier, but it has a late addition in verse 55. Surat al-Mudaththir, chapter the one clothed in the Dathar. So again, another way of saying wrapped up, but exhortation to the prophet early. So the Dathar was a kind, 1 through 7. The Dathar is a kind of outer garment the prophet said to cover himself with his mantle when the revelation came to him. There is, however, the possibility that Mudaththir might refer to something like the laggard or the secret or something. The wrath flee, you know, the idolatry. The word is Rugza in Syriac, wrath. Bell's Origin, page 88, says that the early judgment, 8 through 10, the perversity of man in general, 11 through 17, created alone, as in with me or with I, a third person taken or referred as humans are unique. Added to the preceding, applied to as an individual, 18 through 26, explanation of Sakar, is it, or, oh, I forget, I think it's Sakar. 27 to 30, the 19, just like the 8, very interesting thing to point out. People saying it's working with the spirits. It's impressive working with the spirits, but you know, as it followed with as a matter of tradition, but that's not. The scorching the flesh, you know, the mankind, the angel guards, 19. There's 19 encoded in the Quran, but not like the Rashid Khalifa thing. It turns out when you lead those verses in, you have more 19 related things, but you know, he was hasty in his pulling things out. The number of angels of hell not to be insisted on, Medinan, 31 to 34. The Quran warning early, 35 to 49. And those are not, where's the thing? You know, those are not suspicious. Okay. So the believers are not suspicious, you know, that's a sign of being a believer. Nothing but a reminder, the Quran, one of the great things, the Suwar, well, broader than that, so it can refer back to that. Fate of the Sinners, 41 to 49. Perhaps Medinan. And reception of the message, 50 to 55 Meccan. So the death, the certainty of death. Okay, a meaning uncertain, the sheets unrolled. Each one wants a revealed book for himself. Perhaps in bravado, professes himself anxious to be presented with the record of his deeds. Yeah, some people are so sure of themselves. Other people, it's like, you know, you got some things going on, right? Surah, you know, because like Satanism, really, Satanism is like there's a goal generally that everybody becomes the prophet. Now, in a way, we can all become spiritually gifted or whatever, but not in the way of people being expected to follow us or anything, or that we have our own revelation straight from, you know, all the good and truth we're probably seeking through that stuff is probably just already there. We're just not looking for it. Like in the Quran, find something good or true that is not supported by the Quran. Find something that is evil or ignorant that is not condemned by the Quran. In its broader specific form, I've never been able to find anything in the, you know, approaching 23 years when this is released. Not a single example. So the beginning are two short pieces differing in rhyme, one asserting that Allah's power is to restore the body at the resurrection, and the other, verse 7 to 12, describing the last day. It's possible that the first, which is evidently an answer to the dust and bones objection of the doctrine, ended at verse 4, and that 5 and 6 were introduced to form the connection. But that is quite uncertain. The description of the last day was later extended to the addition of 13 to 15, verse 16 to 19 are quite out of connection, out of no doubt an early discarded scrap on the back of which the addition was made. They are interesting as throwing light on Muhammad's methods in composing the Quran. A reproach addressed to the people of neglectful of the hereafter in verse 20, 21 leads to other short descriptions of the judgment, 22 to 25, and to a death scene as a motive for remembering it. According to Ibn Hisham, page 340, Muhammad used the motive in his first address in Medina, so we may perhaps date this addition about the time of the Hijrah. Verse 31 to 40 start with the description of the conduct of some unbeliever and end with an argument for the resurrection from the generation of man. The two verses 34 and 35 are quite enigmatical, and probably we have in the passage several fragments, the back of which was used for the addition of 20 to 30. Surat al-Qiyamah, chapter of the resurrection. Allah's power to restore humanity, Meccan 1 through 6. The blame casting soul, exact meaning uncertain, but we have this three stages: the animal soul, the self-correcting soul, the soul at peace, the self-accusing soul with the conscious that speaks of the punishment of blame and kind of refines itself, you know. The last day, 7 through 12, early scrap, and later with 13 through 19, and supercilious attitude of some individual passage, maybe from somewhere else, I don't know. That would be verse 31. Neglect of the future judgment, 20 to 30, and 31 to 40 is what we talked about, the attitude of somebody. And let's go back a little. And so knowing the future, people want to know the future. Well, we should be concerned about our character and what we're going to do as far as whatever, not just some predicting the future. And people mess up the whole idea of a prophet, like if they're just a bunch of future predictors, and that's not it at all. The verb taken the other sense of acting wickedly, the moon's seeking away, the sun and the moon brought together, like Ezekiel 32, verse 7, Joel 2:10, Apocrypha, the Apocalypse of John 6:12. Airhens approves Baum Stark's suggestion that verse, the being brought together is, and other things like that in the Quran are derived from some picture which Muhammad had seen. Say the vision. What we have is the verses. We don't have the vision. There's details left that couldn't quite be expressed, maybe weren't remembered, but yeah. The demonstration, Surah 24, verse 24. And okay, what is the sense of composing the Quran? So some people like disregarded the Quran's form. Oh no, the explanation of it. Yeah, some people, the inspired teaching, that was the thing. Muhammad wasn't supposed to speak his own doctrine, even when he had the Quran. He was supposed to speak the inspired sayings. So that's further support against those who talk about this Quran only stuff, that Muhammad was the person to explain it because he was inspired to explain and practice more than just conveying the verse in some direct form. And the negative here is shown that the detached from context perceiving negative. So people, some people aren't accepting as true. Some people aren't acting out the stuff like praying. That's on them, not on you. The people that think that holes are being born in them, the faqira, also connected with fiqar, the vertebra of the backbone, also explained as a back-breaking calamity. The verb faqara is however used in making an incision in the snout of a camel in which to insert the leading rope, and spaces here are spoken of. This is appropriate. The soul parting the body, coming up to the collarbone. All that talk in the queens of the tarot and the Om Namah Shivaya, Shivaya Nama Om, all that stuff. You feel this, but I'm not saying that visualizing some blue dude or whatever. I'm not limiting to incarnated types of forms. That's not what I mean with that. So there's going to be some confusion because some people don't. Oh, like Shiva is a separate god. It's like, no, Islam is like all the names of God are, all the true names of God are, God. But who does the pronoun refer to? The nearer and nearer. Verse 34 and 35 may be separate. Although if you hear it, a lot of this stuff, people can say it's separate and all that, and then you realize it as what it is, and it makes sense.